President.
Republican Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, before coming to the floor each day, I try to make sure I go through the morning newspapers, and today I found the Washington Post with an interesting column, "A multi-car pileup as EVs collide with reality." Multi-car pileup as electric vehicles collide with reality. And the reality is the Democrat electric vehicle mandate is a failure. Failed the American people, failed the taxpayers, and just plain failed. For years, President Biden and Democrats tried to force Americans to buy electric vehicles. They tried to do it by banning gas-powered cars. They tried to do it by bribing people with taxpayer subsidies. President Trump has rightly promised to pull the plug on Joe Biden's unpopular electric vehicle mandate. People are delighted. President Trump fulfilled that promise on day one in office. He ended the Biden ban on gas-powered vehicles. In my home state of Wyoming, your home state of Montana, that is welcome relief. The next step is for Congress, for this body, to end the subsidies on electric vehicles, and I've introduced legislation to do just that. My bill ends the $7,500 subsidy for EVs. It also closes the Biden loophole that funnels taxpayer monies, believe it or not, to communist China. Finally, it ends the subsidies for the EV charging stations. The EV subsidies were, in essence, a Biden giveaway. Wanted to give money away to the coastal elites who drive electric vehicles. And it was connected to Biden's unpopular climate dreams. The aggressive push for EVs began with Democrats' reckless tax and spending bill. It included a $7,500 handout for anyone who bought an electric vehicle. Well, not a single Republican in the House or Senate voted for that reckless tax and spending bill. The Joint Committee on Taxation looked at the cost of these EV subsidies because there was going to be a mandate attached. You were going to have to buy an electric vehicle at some point or other. So originally they said it might cost $14 billion. That's a lot of money. When they redid the math a year later, they said the cost estimated would be $100 billion. Outside analysts estimated the cost even higher. Goldman Sachs said that the EV subsidies could cost taxpayers as much as $294 billion, which is 28 times as much as the original thought that it would be when the Joint Committee on Taxation looked at it. Look, these subsidies, this is for a vehicle that most Americans can't afford, don't want, doesn't work for them, doesn't work in my home state of Wyoming, and doesn't work, Mr. President, in your home state of Montana. Most Americans know that EVs are luxury items, severe limitations, certainly can't be the primary source of transportation for most Americans. Average cost of an EV, $62,000. Well, that's $16,000 more than the cost of most gas-powered vehicles. The dealers I talk to in my home state of Wyoming tell me that it takes significantly longer to sell an EV than a gas-powered vehicle. And the EVs that they are able to sell, they end up selling for a loss. The nationwide sales of EVs is also stalling, actually lost market share in 2024. Despite endless subsidies, EVs account for less than 10% of all car sales in America. And most of these are sold to wealthier Americans, people who don't need a subsidy from the government to begin with. This is social engineering to benefit the liberal elite. It's a transfer of money from hardworking American families to the wealthy. Every time a wealthy liberal in San Francisco gets a government subsidy when they go and buy an electric car, a working-class family in Sheridan, Wyoming, ends up paying in their taxes. My legislation ends all of that. EVs are a bad investment for American people and for American automakers. This month, Ford projected that in 2025 it would lose over $5.5 billion on its electric vehicles. 2024, Ford sold only 21,000 EVs. It lost $5 billion. That's a loss of $60,000 for each and every electric vehicle that they were able to sell. Now, Ford isn't alone. Major car companies, General Motors, and others are also losing money on EVs. The transition to EVs is also estimated to kill hundreds of thousands of jobs, including in the Midwest, manufacturing jobs of gas-powered vehicles. It's already sending thousands of American workers from the assembly line to the unemployment line. Ending subsidies for EVs is about saving taxpayer money, protecting American jobs, but it's also about protecting our national security. Initially, only EVs made in America were supposed to be eligible for this $7,500 subsidy. But before leaving office, Joe Biden made it easier for those tax credits on EVs to go for those made in with parts from China. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. But Biden and the Democrats, so desperate to force EVs onto the American public, they created a leasing loophole, specifically designed to help China. This is how it works. It allows customers who lease EVs, instead of buy them, but who lease EVs made with Chinese parts, they could still fully receive the subsidy. Well, since 80% of the EV batteries come from China, they had noted a major problem because they weren't going to be able to get the subsidies. That's why they came up with this leasing loophole. Because in 2022, before they had the loophole, only 7% of new EVs were leased. Now, because of this Biden gimmick, that number jumped to 45%, almost half of all the EVs in America then being leased rather than bought. If American taxpayers are subsidizing technologies controlled by communist China, it is wrong. My bill ends that. Republicans are focused on what matters: lowering prices, unleashing American energy, creating American jobs, and putting Americans back in the driver's seat. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Is that also Brooks?